I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Take a deep breath and try to remember. Can you smell the intoxicating scent of jasmine blooming over a whitewashed courtyard wall? Can you hear the rhythmic, deafening song of the cicadas on the hot July afternoon, or the crunch of gravel under your sandals as you ran to the neighborhood square? Today, we are taking a journey back in time, returning to the Greece of the 1960s, 70s, and early 80s. We are going to revisit 20 magical childhood memories that shaped who we are today. We will talk about the tastes, the sounds, and the rituals that have quietly slipped away from our modern world. And please stay with me until the very end, because our final memory regarding a certain blue piece of clothing we all wore might just bring a tear to your eye. Life back then flowed at a completely different pace. Time was not something we constantly chased, but rather something we lived alongside. We did not have instant gratification, and yet we were never truly bored. Waiting was a beautiful part of life. We waited for the milkman in the morning. We waited for our favorite song on the radio. We waited for the Sunday family dinner. Today, people often believe that because we lacked modern technology, our lives were somehow poorer. But you and I know the truth. Our lives were infinitely richer in emotion, in genuine human connection, and in sincerity. We did not look down at screens, we looked at each other. Our neighborhoods were extensions of our own homes, and every open door was an invitation. Let us gently turn the pages of our past and remember what true magic felt like. Let us travel back to a time when the summer heat was defeated not by the hum of an air conditioner, but by the heavy footsteps of the Pagliazzis, the neighborhood iceman. Can you hear the rumbling of his small truck or cart, slowly making its way up your street? You would hear his booming voice echoing through the open windows, calling out to the mothers and grandmothers. We would run outside, barefoot on the warm pavement, just to watch him work. He carried enormous, crystalline blocks of ice on his shoulder, protected by a piece of thick, rough burlap. The heavy metal tongs he used looked so intimidating to our small eyes. Do you remember the smell of the wet sawdust that coated the ice to keep it from melting? When he chipped away a piece to fit into our wooden icebox, shards of ice would fly into the air like diamonds. We would scramble to pick up those tiny, freezing pieces and pop them into our mouths. It was the purest, most refreshing taste of summer. That block of ice meant we would have cold water and that our food would stay fresh for another day. The wooden icebox in the kitchen, with its dripping pan underneath that always needed emptying, was the beating heart of our summer days. And speaking of summer heat, nothing compares to the sweet anticipation of an ipovriccio, the famous submarine sweet. Whenever guests would arrive, or when we had been perfectly well behaved, our grandmothers would go to the kitchen cupboard. They would take out that heavy glass jar filled with the thick, snow-white vanilla fondant. With a special, long-handled spoon, they would scoop out a generous portion and plunge it into a tall glass of ice-cold water. The ritual of eating it was an art form. You would lift the heavy spoon from the water, take a small, sticky bite of the intensely sweet vanilla, and then lower it back into the glass to chill again. The water slowly became sweet and cloudy. We would sit on the veranda, listening to the adults talk, slowly licking the spoon until nothing was left but the sugary water, which we would eagerly drink down. It was a simple treat, costing almost nothing, but it held the luxurious taste of hospitality, love, and endless summer afternoons. As the sun finally set and the intense heat broke, the magic of the evening began at the Therano Cinema, our beloved outdoor movie theatre. Do you remember the sound of the gravel crunching beneath your feet as you walked down the aisles, looking for the perfect canvas director chair? The air was always thick with a mixture of blooming honeysuckle, the pungent smoke of green mosquito coils, and the salty breeze if you lived near the sea. Before the movie even started, the ritual demanded a paper cone filled with passatempos, roasted pumpkin seeds, or heavily salted sunflower seeds. We would crack them perfectly between our teeth, spitting the shells into our hands. When the heavy projector started clicking and the beam of light cut through the dark night sky, a hush would fall over the crowd. We watched dramatic Greek films, laughing with vengos or crying with voudouklaki, surrounded by our neighbors under a canopy of stars. It was a communal dreaming experience that no modern living room television can ever replicate. When September rolled around, our carefree days transitioned into the strict but comforting routine of school. Do you remember the smell of the new leather satchel, heavy and sturdy, meant to last for years? Inside, there were no colourful plastic folders. We had simple, rough paper notebooks with blue lines and red margins. We used wooden pencils that we sharpened with small metal blades, leaving shavings on our wooden desks. Those desks often still had the carved-out holes where inkwells used to sit in older times. The classrooms were drafty in the winter, heated only by a single stove in the corner. We sat 2 by 2, sharing secrets and passing small folded notes when the teacher turned toward the chalkboard. The chalk dust would float in the beams of sunlight crossing the room. Despite the strict discipline and the fear of the teacher's pointer, there was a profound sense of unity. We were all in it together, learning the same history, reciting the same poems, and dreaming of the bell that would release us into the schoolyard. Sunday afternoons in our homes had a very specific soundtrack. It was the crackling, static-filled voice of the sports commentator broadcasting the football matches on the radio. Television was either non-existent or a rare luxury, so the radio was the altar of the living room. Fathers, uncles, and grandfathers would gather around the wooden radio set, their faces tense with concentration. The smell of freshly brewed Greek coffee, with its rich foam, filled the room, often mixing with the blue smoke of cigarettes. We children knew we had to stay incredibly quiet during a penalty kick. The voice of the announcer would rise in pitch, speaking incredibly fast, painting a vivid picture of a stadium we had never seen. When a goal was scored, the entire neighborhood would erupt in cheers that echoed from balcony to balcony. You did not just hear the game, you felt the collective heartbeat of the entire street through those radio waves. It was an era when imagination did the work of a screen. Let us talk about a rare and precious delight. Finding an Ion Amygdaloo chocolate bar in the house was like discovering hidden treasure. Do you remember the iconic yellow wrapper with the beautiful, blossoming almond tree branch on it? Back then, chocolate was not an everyday snack you casually grabbed from a supermarket shelf. It was a reward, a gift brought by an uncle visiting from the city, or a special name day treat. We would peel back the paper and the delicate silver foil with absolute reverence. We would break off one single thick square, making sure it contained a whole roasted almond. The chocolate tasted richer, creamier, and more significant than anything produced today. We would let it melt slowly on our tongues, making the experience last as long as humanly possible. Because things were scarce, we deeply appreciated every single bite. The taste of that almond chocolate is forever linked in our minds with the feeling of being loved and cherished by our families. Our true territory was the street. Before the cars took over, the dirt paths and quiet neighborhood roads belonged to us. Do you remember the intense, competitive games of voloy, playing marbles in the dust? We would draw a circle in the dirt with a stick, our knees covered in grey dust, our hands dirty. We each had our favourite marbles, the colourful glass spheres with magical swirls of blue, green and red trapped inside. We called the best ones our shooters. The sound of a glass marble striking another with a sharp, satisfying clack is a sound you never forget. We argued passionately over the rules, over whose marble crossed the line, negotiating like seasoned lawyers. Winning meant walking away with pockets heavy and jingling with your friends' marbles, feeling like the absolute king of the neighborhood. We learned about fairness, strategy, and resilience on those dusty streets, long before we ever learned about them in books. Before the sun even fully rose, while the morning air was still crisp and cool, the day began with the sounds of the galaters, the milkman. We would wake up to the gentle clinking of glass bottles rubbing against the metal crates of his bicycle or small motorized cart. He would leave the glass bottles at our doorstep, their wide mouths sealed with shiny aluminium caps that we loved to press our thumbs into. But the true ritual happened in the kitchen. Milk back then had to be boiled. Our mothers would pour the thick, creamy milk into a special aluminium pot and stand over the stove. You had to watch it constantly because the moment it boiled, it would rise up in seconds and spill everywhere. The smell of boiling raw milk is deeply nostalgic. As it cooled, a thick, rich skin of cream would form on the surface. Some of us hated that skin, and others fought over who got to eat it on a piece of bread with a little sugar. That glass bottle represented the honest, hard work of the morning. When afternoon playtime finally arrived, our fuel was a thick slice of fresh bread slathered with merenda. Before the bakeries sold sliced bread in plastic bags, bread was bought fresh every single day. The crust was thick, crunchy, and smelled like a real wood-fired oven. Our mothers would cut a generous, uneven slice and spread a thick layer of that glorious hazelnut chocolate cream over it. We would take our slice and run back out to the street or sit on the marble steps of our house. The combination of the hearty, slightly salty bread with the rich, sweet merenda was absolute perfection. Sometimes, if we were out of merenda, bread with butter and a heavy dusting of granulated sugar did the trick just as well. We ate it quickly, wiping our chocolate-stained mouths with the back of our hands, eager to get back to our games of hide and seek. We burned off every calorie running until the streetlights came on. Springtime brought a massive, exhausting, but incredibly fun household event. It was the annual washing of the carpets in the courtyard or on the terrace. Before sending rugs to professional cleaners became the norm, this was a family affair. Mothers and grandmothers would drag the heavy, woven flocati rugs out into the sun. The garden hose was turned on, and cheap, strong-smelling powder detergent was thrown everywhere. We children were practically given permission to play in the water. We would take off our shoes, roll up our trousers, and stomp on the soapy carpets with our bare feet, helping to scrub out the winter dirt. The suds would rise up to our ankles. It was incredibly hard physical labor for the women, scrubbing with stiff brushes until their hands were red, but for us, it was a water park. Then came the struggle of lifting the impossibly heavy, waterlogged carpets to hang over the balcony railings. The smell of clean soap and wet wool baking in the spring sun meant that summer was finally on its way. Communication was a physical, deliberate act. Let us remember the heavy, grey, OTE rotary telephone. Not every house had one at first. Sometimes an entire neighbourhood relied on the phone in the local grocery store or a lucky neighbour's hallway. When you finally had one in your home, it sat proudly on a dedicated small table, often covered by a hand-crocheted doily. Making a call required patience. You had to place your finger in the hole, pull the heavy dial all the way around to the metal stopper, let it go, and wait for the mechanical whirring sound as it returned to its place. You repeated this for every single digit. If you made a mistake, you had to hang up and start all over again. Long-distance calls to relatives in the village or abroad were massive events. The connection was poor, the static was loud, and the adults would practically shout into the heavy receiver. We respected the telephone. It was not a toy, it was a rare bridge to the people we loved who lived far away. Winter evenings held a different kind of magic, centered entirely around the sompa, the wood or oil stove in the main room. Central heating was a distant dream for most. The stove was the absolute center of the universe when the cold winds blew outside. The metal would glow dull red in the dark, radiating an intense, dry heat. The best part of winter was when our parents would bring home paper bags full of fresh chestnuts. We would carefully score the shells with a knife and place them directly on the hot metal top of the stove. Slowly, the house would fill with the intoxicating, sweet, and earthy aroma of roasting chestnuts. You had to turn them constantly so they would not burn. We would sit on the rug, burning our fingertips trying to peel the stubborn shells while they were still too hot. Eating those sweet, crumbly chestnuts while listening to the wind rattle the wooden shutters made us feel incredibly safe. The warmth of the stove was matched only by the warmth of the family gathered tightly around it. There was one strict rule that governed our summers, a rule enforced with iron will by every mother in the country: the afternoon siesta. From 2 to 5 in the afternoon, the neighbourhood had to remain absolutely silent. The wooden shutters of the windows were closed tight to keep out the blinding sun, leaving only thin, glowing slivers of light striping the dark rooms. You were forced to lie in bed, sweating slightly on the cotton sheets. Outside, the world belonged only to the cicadas, their mechanical buzzing vibrating through the heavy, hot air. We would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, tracing shapes in the plaster, desperately waiting for the clock to strike 5. We were not allowed to make a sound, not allowed to run, not allowed to play. Looking back, that forced stillness was a gift. It taught us how to be alone with our thoughts, how to endure boredom, and how to appreciate the explosive joy of rushing back out into the cooler evening air when the siesta finally ended. The journey to school in the morning was often accompanied by the most glorious street food of our generation, the classic kuluri. We would spot the street vendor standing on the corner, holding his large, round, woven basket filled to the brim with fresh rings of dough. The smell of the baked bread and toasted sesame seeds was irresistible in the crisp morning air. We would fish a few small coins out of our pockets. The vendor would hand us the warm kuluri, wrapped in a small piece of rough paper. As we walked, we would tear off pieces. The outside was incredibly crunchy, and the inside was soft and chewy. Sesame seeds would fall everywhere, getting stuck to our school uniforms and inside our satchels. It was simple, cheap, and deeply satisfying. That humble kuluri provided us with the energy we needed to face the school day. Even today, the smell of toasted sesame instantly transports us back to those chilly, hurried walks to the school gates. Easter was not just a holiday, it was a massive sensory explosion that began weeks in advance. The most vivid memory is the making of the traditional homemade sareki. Our mothers and grandmothers would take over the kitchen. The air grows heavy with the exotic, sweet perfumes of ground mastic and marlep. Kneading the dough was a monumental task, requiring strong arms and endless patience. We watched as the dough was placed in large basins, covered with woolen blankets, and placed near the heater to rise. It felt like a living, breathing thing. Then came the braiding, tucking the bright red dyed eggs into the sweet dough. When the baking began, the smell was so intoxicating, it drifted out into the street, mingling with the scents coming from the neighbors' kitchens. We were strictly forbidden from eating it before the resurrection night. That waiting made the first, soft, stringy bite of tsureki on Easter Sunday taste like a little piece of heaven. For a few coins at the local kiosk, the periptero, we could buy a treasure that defined our playground economy. The tiramola and fracappa bubblegums. They were not just sweets, they were a complete entertainment system. The gum itself was incredibly sweet, but lost its flavor in about 3 minutes, leaving you chewing a tough, rubbery mass. But we did not buy them for the taste. We bought them for the tiny, folded paper comics hidden inside the wrapper. We would carefully unwrap the gum, desperate to see which character we got. We would read the tiny jokes, compare them with our friends, and trade the duplicates. We tried to blow massive bubbles, which usually ended up popping and sticking entirely to our noses and eyelashes. Walking away from the kiosk with a pocket full of those brightly coloured wrappers felt like absolute victory. They were the currency of our childhood, representing our independence and our innocent, joyful obsessions. Shopping was an intimate relationship, not a cold, automated transaction. We all remember the neighbourhood bacaliko, the local grocery store. It was a dimly lit, magical cave packed from floor to ceiling. The air was a complex blend of smells: salted cod, sharp feta cheese sitting in wooden barrels of brine, dried oregano, and cheap soap. The grocer knew us by name, knew our parents, and knew exactly what we needed. There were no plastic packages. Goods like rice, sugar, and legumes were kept in large sacks. The grocer would scoop them out with a metal shovel, weigh them on a brass scale with physical weights, and twist them elegantly into paper cones. If our parents were short on cash until payday, the grocer would take out his small, worn notebook and write the debt down on credit. The tefteri. It was an economy built entirely on mutual trust, honour, and deep community bonds. When we were sent to buy bread or cheese, we were not just running an errand, we were participating in the lifeblood of the neighbourhood. As the evening grew cooler, the ultimate game began. Crifto, hide and seek, played across the entire neighbourhood. The shadows lengthened, providing perfect hiding spots behind parked cars, overgrown jasmine bushes, and low stone walls. The thrill of holding your breath while the seeker walked right past you was heart-pounding. We would run frantically to the base, slamming our hand against the wall and shouting the magic words to free ourselves. The game only ended when it was completely dark. One by one, we would hear our mothers' voices calling our names from the balconies, cutting through the night air. It was time for dinner, time to wash the dirt off our knees. We would walk home, our hearts still racing, completely exhausted but utterly free. There were no tracking apps, no cell phones to check where we were. Our parents trusted the neighbourhood, and we were free to roam and imagine until the streetlights signalled the end of the day. Capturing a memory was a rare and solemn event. There were no endless digital selfies. Taking a photograph was a ritual. Often, a traveling photographer would come to the village square, or our parents would take us to a proper studio. We were dressed in our Sunday best, our hair slicked down with water or combed perfectly. The photographer had a heavy, imposing camera, sometimes on a wooden tripod. We were instructed to stand perfectly still, not to blink, and to smile just the right amount. Then came the blinding flash of the bulb. The true magic, however, was the waiting. It took weeks for the film to be developed and the prints to be made. When the envelope finally arrived, the family would gather around to look at the glossy, black and white or sepia-toned images with jagged edges. We held those photographs with care, storing them in heavy albums. Each photo was precious because it was singular. It was a physical piece of time, captured forever, far more valuable than 1,000 pictures sitting forgotten on a modern phone. And finally, let us remember the garment that united an entire generation. The school podia, the blue uniform. Before the 1980s changed everything, every student wore one. For the girls, it was a blue dress with a crisp white collar. For the boys, it was a similar blue tunic or sweater. Our mothers spent hours washing and carefully ironing those uniforms, ensuring the white collars were perfectly starched. We hated how stiff they felt, how hot they were in the early summer, and how easily they showed the blue ink stains from our leaky pens. But looking back, that blue cloth did something magical. It erased the differences between the rich child and the poor child. When we stepped into the schoolyard, dressed in the exact same shade of blue, we were equals. We were a sea of children bound by the same rules, the same struggles, and the same dreams. When they abolished the uniforms, we cheered for our freedom. But as the years passed, we realized that we had lost a symbol of our shared childhood. That blue apron is the very fabric of our youth. When we look back at these 20 memories, a beautiful realization washes over us. We do not just miss the taste of the warm kaluri, the sound of the glass marbles, or the glow of the wood stove. What we truly miss is who we were back then. We miss the innocence, the slow passing of time, and the deep, unbreakable connections we shared with our families and our neighbours. We lived with less, yet our hearts were so incredibly full. If this journey back in time brought a smile to your face or a tear to your eye, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like so we can continue to preserve these precious pieces of our history. Now, I would love to hear from you. Which of these memories hit you the hardest? Or what is a forgotten ritual from your own neighbourhood that you still long for today? Please, write your stories in the comments below. Let us build a beautiful archive of our shared past together.